Digimon Story Cyber Sleuth, when it came out, was one of, if not the most refined and polished RPGs and really just games in the franchise. So it was no real surprise for me that Cyber Sleuth ended up becoming Digimon's most successful singular game. What was a surprise for me, and probably most fans though, was the fact that not only would the game get a sequel, but it would get one that took place at the exact same time as the original, simply titled Digimon Story Cyber Sleuth Hacker's Memory. Hacker's Memory was made not in response to the success of the original Cyber Sleuth, but because they had another story game in the works that they knew would take a while, so in an effort to keep the pace with fans, they decided to make a game depicting a whole new side of the original Cyber Sleuth. And honestly, looking back on it, while I love the sentiment behind this game's reason for existing, it's kind of ironic since a little more than 6 years later, we, unfortunately, still haven't seen anything at all for Digimon Story 6 at the time of this video. Having said that though, I actually never got around to playing Hacker's Memory when it first came out. The game came out during a, we'll just say, very depressing part of my life that lasted literal years, and as a result, longer games like this were something I had a lot of trouble finding the energy to finish or even just play. And I gotta say, past me really missed out on Hacker's Memory, because honestly, there's a pretty strong argument that it legitimately might be the best game in the Digimon franchise. And I'm not just saying that at all, I'm completely serious. It's not exactly free of issues by any means, but it improves on most of the problems the original Cyber Sleuth had, while also having a main cast I just fell in love with. So join me while I explain to you in a lot more detail why Hacker's Memory is my new favorite Digimon game. Hacker's Memory, like I said before, takes place at the exact same time as Cyber Sleuth, but instead of following Aiba and friends, it follows Kisuke Amasawa, a 16-year-old kid who, after getting his Eden account stolen by a hacker, had to drop out of high school. See, as it turns out, Eden was a lot more important to the world at large than I thought it was, with your account apparently functioning similarly to your ID. Unfortunately for Kisuke, this means having a temporary account at all comes with the social stigma of being labeled as a hacker, since they create temporary ones after every crime. So aside from his friend Yu, nobody at school, not even the teachers, trusted him anymore. Thankfully for Kisuke though, a mysterious hacker named Kei, who considers himself a guardian of Eden, decides to lend him a hand and sends him information on the supposed identity of the hacker who stole his account in the first place. So after finding himself at the Digimarket for information, he ends up getting a Digimon of his own and is eventually offered a job to work at Huddy by Ryuji Mishima after hearing his story, with Huddy doubling as both an internet cafe and, ironically enough, a team of hackers who work directly under Zaxxon, Eden's largest and most powerful hacker group. Now, as for the previously mentioned Digimon partners, it works the same way it did with Cyber Sleuth, in that all of them are obtainable in the game normally, so you can pick whoever you like the most. I went with Betamon this time around because, honestly, this adorable little froggy fish guy doesn't get enough love in my opinion. So, with Hacker's Memory taking place at the exact same time as Cyber Sleuth and having its own unique cast of characters, it takes a different approach to the story this time around, while still giving a bit more development for certain characters from the first game, like Arata and Date, who I must say has a very adorable crush on Ryuji. It focuses a lot more on the culture of hackers in Eden, which is something that wasn't explored too much in the first game. And instead of being a story about primarily solving mysteries with things like the Eaters and Kamashiro Enterprises, it's a lot more personal since Hacker's Memory heavily revolves around our team of hackers at Huddy. If Cyber Sleuth's main cast were our chosen Digidestined, these guys are the equivalent of the supporting cast or side characters. They got their own stories to tell, but they aren't going to be the guys actively risking life and limb on trying to save the world. Unless it's relevant to the story, Hacker's Memory doesn't focus too strongly on a lot of what happens during Cyber Sleuth. And on that note, I gotta say you really should play that game before you play Hacker's Memory. There's a lot of things about the plot you'll be confused on otherwise, and there'll be twists that won't have as much of an effect if you experience them here. Instead of the stuff involving Cyber Sleuth though, Hacker's Memory focuses primarily on Huddy, and like I implied at the start of this video, I kinda love these guys. And really it's not so much for their individual characters as much as it is their dynamic. Not only do they all have great chemistry with each other, they also just feel like a family, which is kind of fitting given that Ryuji and another member of the team, Erika, are actually siblings. Now, none of that's to say I don't like them individually at all, because I do. Chitose, a longtime friend of Ryuji's, took a little bit to grow on me, but once he did, he was always fun to have on screen, especially when he tried teaching Kisuke how to flirt with women for this one case early on. I wouldn't blame anyone for finding this a bit cringy, honestly, but for me it's kinda wholesome in a way. Ryuji was a strong leader for the team, and honestly a lot of his character can be summed up with, "This man needs a hug." He's someone who carries a lot of internal pain as well as stress, and I really enjoyed how this game handles his character, especially in its second half. Ryuji's sister Erika is easily my favorite character in the game for a lot of reasons I can't go into without spoilers, so for right now, I'll just say I really liked her character as well as her interactions with the main cast, especially with her partner Wormmon, who's an absolutely precious little bean, and Erika has easily my favorite moments from both of the Cyber Sleuth games. Now, with all of that being said though, we do have to touch on the weak spot of the group with our protagonist, Kisuke, because while he's better than Cyber Sleuth's protagonist, he still suffers from a similar issue, and on that note, I need to retract a statement I made during the last video. See, during my review on Cyber Sleuth, I said that it felt like the writers couldn't decide whether they wanted the protagonist to be silent or their own character, and after playing Hacker's Memory, I've come to realize that this was wrong. The actual problem is that silent protagonists just really do not work for these games. We get more of Kisuke's own thoughts on things than we did with Aiba in the last game, which is a big part of the reason I like him more as a protagonist since he feels like more of a character, but this also makes his whole not outright speaking to people thing even more awkward. Like, I get why they do it. It's to allow the player to better project themselves onto the main protagonist. It's a big reason why some RPGs have silent protagonists to begin with, but with the kind of story Cyber Sleuth and especially Hacker's Memory are telling, I really don't think it works here. It just feels awkward and out of place. That being said though, the main protagonist isn't the only aspect of the story that's improved somewhat, because the pacing this time around is much better. There aren't as many mandatory cases that aren't relevant to the plot in some way. A vast majority of them are relevant to important plot lines, or they serve to give a character a bit more development. And that's a really nice improvement over the first game. On that note, a part of me feels like the normal cases in Hacker's Memory might be a bit better than Cyber Sleuth's. I might just be biased since all of these cases felt totally new and fresh to me this time around, but on average, I like the stories and writing a bit more. Some of my favorites are really any case that involves Yuko, since they never fail to get a smile out of me. The fake date with Yu for being incredibly adorable, and a certain case involving Date later in the game I won't say anything about to avoid spoilers. I gotta say though, I can't even begin to describe to you how shocked I was that Hacker's Memory has a case that's somehow a lot darker than Living Doll's dead person from the last game. Because despite this case seemingly just being about a bunch of kids cheating on their tests, cheat strategy is on a whole other level of messed up. I won't say why, since honestly you really should experience it for yourself, but understand that you really aren't going to be prepared for where this case goes. In regards to the story as a whole though, I honestly like it even more than Cyber Sleuth's. I have my issues with it, which we'll get more into later, but Huddy was such a lovable and well-written group of characters, and there's so many moments and parts of the story I loved. Now, before we get to the gameplay, I, much to my surprise, have to give a quick mention to Hacker's Memory's presentation, because while the game looks and sounds mostly the same as what Cyber Sleuth did, the visuals for the dungeons are much better. The color palettes are far more varied this time around, and they don't repeat the layouts nearly as often as what they did before. Heck, there's actually more dungeons with completely unique aesthetics as well, like with the bank server. I do wish there was a couple more dungeons like this, honestly, but hey, an improvement's an improvement, and this is a really nice one. As for the gameplay though, just like before, Hacker's Memory is a turn-based RPG where you can have a maximum of 11 Digimon in your party, with only 3 being allowed in combat at a time, with getting and training new Digimon also working exactly the same way, so my thoughts there really haven't changed at all since last time. The combat system itself is similar in this regard. Nothing's really changed at all, and it's just as simple but effective as before. I gotta say though, I did have a slightly different experience here compared to the last game for 2 reasons. The simplest one is that I straight up just took my advice from the last video and I decided to use a larger variety of Digimon, and not just a small pool of 5 or 6 to save time. It made collecting and training Digimon a lot more fun to get invested in this time around, and it even made the game the tiniest bit harder. The other reason is that the boss encounters were actually a bit more interesting this time around. In Cyber Sleuth, I found the bosses gameplay-wise kinda lacking with a few exceptions, but they're actually a little bit better this time around, like in the bank server, where you fight this guy with 2 Clockmon and a Golden Rapidmon. That being said though, the actual difficulty is probably around the same as what it was in Cyber Sleuth, so just like before, if you're someone who wants or even needs a challenge, you'll definitely want to play in hard mode for the normal fights, cause Hacker's Memory will probably be too easy otherwise. So with all of that being said, let's get into the other improvements and the new stuff, starting with quality of life. Something I neglected to mention in the last video was just how inconvenient Nakano Broadway was as a base. The board for cases, the phone for the Digilab, and the Eden spot for jumping into Eden were all in entirely separate locations, with the Eden spot being on the 4th floor. It's not the worst thing ever at all, and for someone like me, I'm not too bothered by it, but at the very least, not having the Eden spot closer to the detective agency wasn't a good move in my opinion. It made getting to Eden for a case or story mission take longer than necessary. With Hacker's Memory though, all of that is gone. This time around, our base of operations is Ryuji and Erika's internet cafe Huddy, and it's much more convenient than Nakano Broadway was. Eden, the bulletin board, this time around referred to as BBS, and the Digilab can all be accessed from your computer, and on top of that, there's also a shop at the front of the cafe for buying items and equipment. I also like how much cleaner the BBS is compared to the bulletin board as well. Here, all of your cases are shown in a list instead of tacked onto a whiteboard with sheets of paper, with BBS putting all completed cases at the bottom of it and even having separate categories you can swap to for a specific kind of case. On another convenience-related note though, I love the inclusion of the Accelerate hacker skill. When activated, this increases your movement speed so you can get around faster, and honestly, while the last game's walk speed never bothered me at all, being able to get around Eden this fast is very nice, and it makes completing Mirai's hacker and property cases much faster this time around. There are a bunch of other new hacker skills, but honestly, I don't have too much to say about them. Root access can make or delete floors at certain terminals for occasional puzzle solving, Free Gate is basically an infinite use export, and Power Control can turn the power on or off for certain things, but as far as I'm aware, it's only really used in one area in the game. Yeah, my opinions on the hacker skills as a whole are mostly the same as in Cyber Sleuth. They're a cool and interesting idea as well as a very appropriate one for this game specifically, but they're not too interesting in execution for me. That being said though, there is one more hacker skill that does tie into one of the more interesting new things the game adds with Restoration. This is used entirely for fixing these broken Mr. Navit bots that'll give you items in return, but sometimes they'll give you a memory of some kind. There are 36 memories in total, and you'll be able to find them really anywhere in the game. These serve as a way to give you some extra little moments between other characters, and leave them show you another side of them like with Faye. While I think there was room for at least a few more, I really enjoyed the inclusion of them here, with my personal favorite being the Sleuth memory for being absolutely hilarious. They were a great way to get a little bit of extra character building in, and I'd love to see these return in Digimon Story 6. On another note though, we also have two entirely new types of cases this time around, with the territory and dominance battles. Starting with the former of the two, since it's the easiest to explain, territory battles are special cases given to you by Faye. These will have you trying to take the territory of another hacker team. Theoretically, all you really need to do is just beat the leader, but the twist for these is that while all of the other hacker team emblems are up, your team will be hit with some kind of negative effect or debuff that'll vary from case to case. So with the help of a partner character who can be a member of Huddy when available, or another character like Nokia or Rada, you'll be going through their base trying to take each emblem so you can turn the negative effect back on the boss for that case. Honestly, while they are fun, there's not much to actually say with the territory battles. They're a nice inclusion that takes advantage of status effects and debuffs in an interesting way, but they really are just hacker fight gauntlets. The dominance battles, though, are a very different story. Every now and then you'll usually have to go up against a team of 3 hackers with your own team of 2 or 3 people, including yourself. Each character and enemy has a set team of only 3 Digimon at most, and they can't use any items for healing, with the goal being to get a certain amount of points by moving on to white or the opposing side's spaces during each character's turn, with the point values ranging from 1, 5, and 10. Now, unless your goal is to instead just defeat the enemy team like in some of Mirai's dominance battles, your teammates as well as the opposing side will respawn at their starting square during their next turn if their team gets wiped. For dominance battles in the story, your 1 or 2 other teammates will be pre-picked out for you, but for optional ones you can call in help from anyone currently available to you at that point in the story, which can even include Digimon from certain optional side cases that can also join you for territory battles. Alright, so as a new style for fights, I guess you could call it, I really liked the dominance battles. Compared to normal fights, these can actually be a decent challenge thanks to the previously mentioned Digimon item limits as well as your teammates having preset teams. With certain exceptions like Faye, who's rocking a full team of Megas at all times, this usually keeps you from totally steamrolling the enemy at all. Heck, unlike the base game, I actually lost a few times during these, which was a strangely pleasant surprise. At the end of both territory and dominance battles, though, you'll have a chance at having a one-on-one talk with your partner or teammates, where you're presented with 3 different choices for how to respond. These don't really affect the gameplay at all, but they do serve as some nice or fun little interactions, and while any of your choices will net you an item, the best choice will get you better items than normal. All in all, it's a nice little addition that I wouldn't mind them expanding on in the future. Like, I'm just saying, I wouldn't be against them taking this idea in a bit more of a Persona direction for Digimon Story 6. That being said though, we have spoilers to talk about, so if you want to avoid that at all, skip to the timestamp here or skip ahead to the following chapter, because I have a good bit to talk about. So with that out of the way, let's get into it. Okay, so to start this off, let's get my biggest issue out of the way first. The whole K plotline is kind of a mess. Like, it was really promising early on, you know. I was super interested in whoever K ended up being, eventually realized it was gonna be you, and then got super interested in whoever the voice in Yu's head was. And then things got weird. Alright, so here's the thing. I do really like what they were going for with Yu. He has a lot of confidence issues and only wants to be strong enough so he can feel like he can be relied on by the guy he likes. And the idea of having a Digimon roll in and manipulate and pervert those feelings into something more extreme and very yandere is a really cool idea that could have made for some really great storytelling. But they really did not handle this well. For starters, I wish the members of Huddy were more involved in the confrontations with Yu. With him having gone a bit yandere thanks to Matadormon's influence, Yu wants Kisuke all to himself, and while I don't have any specific interactions in mind, I feel like it was a missed opportunity to not have them be at least a little more involved somehow to reflect this desire of his. Secondly, does anyone else feel like this whole plotline became weirdly less and less important as time went on? Like, Kisuke's account being stolen is the entire reason he even joins Huddy, but after a while this whole thing starts to feel unimportant since by the time we deal with K, Ryuji's joined forces with the data assimilating Hellspawn that can solo an ultimate level Digimon while being only a rookie. While I don't know how feasible this would have actually been, I really wish they finished the whole plotline before the Under Zero part of the game instead. Both so it won't be overshadowed anymore, and so that you can get a redemption arc of sorts for the game's second half, because honestly, I really feel like his character would have greatly benefited from having more post-Matadormon focus. And you know what, on the note of Matadormon, can we all agree that his fight is stupid, and it's purely because of vampiric cajolery? Like, everything else about this fight is perfectly fine, but who at the design team thought it was okay to give this guy a move that guarantees panic on all 3 Digimon along with all of the stat effects? It would be one thing if it was like a 40 to 50% chance at most. That would be a lot less annoying and more manageable. But why 100%? Like, I didn't die at all thanks to pure luck and my team being tanky enough to survive the panic and his attacks, but it's so frustrating and even kind of boring having to just sit there for 30 seconds to a minute, waiting to have any kind of input at all while my team beats the crap out of each other and occasionally the boss. Also, I'm not a fan of the I love you line. The gotcha part makes the whole thing feel insensitive and mean-spirited. On a more positive note though, I can't tell you how surprised I was to see Arcadiamon of all things as a major villain in this game. This is a Digimon whose only official appearance as far as I can tell was in the V-Tamers manga more than 20 years ago. I may not have read the V-Tamers manga at all, but this was a really cool surprise regardless. And if I'm being honest, I just really liked this part of the game in general. Like I've said before, Ryuji carries around a lot of internal pain as well as stress, and with Chitose having been taken out of commission by an eater, the Arcadiamon arc pretty much feels like Ryuji's long overdue mental breakdown. It was a great arc of the story that showed a really interesting side to how Ryuji feels about his sister and vice versa, even if his feelings were exaggerated a bit by Arcadiamon. And I'll never not love the lecture Chitose gives Ryuji after you beat Arcadiamon Mega. I do have one problem with this arc though, in how it never actually explains why Arcadiamon was imprisoned in Under Zero. Like, honestly, given how dangerous this thing is, it's really weird that they never explain this in any way. At the very least, you'd think there would be a memory answering why, but for whatever reason, there just isn't. Now, before we end the spoilers, we gotta talk about how good the ending was, and really the entire ending part of the game. Eroded Eden was visually a very depressing and interesting sight after having spent so long here, and I'm happy we got at least one new Eater design with the Eater bits. And on the note of the Eater's designs though, I love how Eater Eden looks like a brain. It's a really fitting and cool looking design for a final boss in a game all about memories, and honestly, I kinda like Hackersmemory's final boss more than Cyber Sleuth's. The Mother Eater fight was good, but the emotional weight behind Eater Legion and Eater Eden just makes the whole thing feel more impactful for me. On an unrelated note though, because I honestly don't know where else to put this, I love the visuals for Erica's memory server. The child and dreamlike art they use make for some really great visual storytelling for Erica's life and how she feels. And on the subject of Erica, oh my god, this ending is so bittersweet. Everyone who isn't Kisuke forgetting her is just sad and very painful. But knowing that she's able to fulfill her dream of going to the digital world, now reborn as Hudimon and free of her illness, does make up for some of that. And honestly, the fact that her new group of friends is the team of Digimon you created really just makes the whole thing even more wholesome. The digital world's in good hands with these guys as the vanguard, especially since, in my case, one of them is literally a version of Omnimon. Really though, the whole ending part of Hacker's Memory easily cemented Erica as one of my new favorite characters in the franchise, and it was a really great way to end off the story. Whether you agree with me or not on Hacker's Memory being the best game in the franchise, I don't think it's a stretch to say at all that it's just a better Cyber Sleuth. Like I said at the start, a lot of the first game's issues were addressed here, from the dungeon visuals to the pacing, and even with quality of life elements like how convenient for the player Huddy is. The new additions to the gameplay combined with the extra quality of life make for an even more fun experience. Honestly, I don't know how I'll be able to go back to Cyber Sleuth after playing Hacker's Memory, and I've made it no secret just how much I enjoyed the story and how much I loved the main cast as well. Hacker's Memory isn't perfect, but it's a really wonderful sequel, or midquel I guess you could call it, for Cyber Sleuth, and it really feels like the devs were fully listening with how many of the previous game's issues they ended up addressing. This makes me even more excited for the eventual Digimon Story 6, honestly, because if they do the same thing there, not only will we have a game that could easily become my new favorite Digimon game, but I really feel like we could be in for something special. And now that I'm done with these videos, I'm sad to say that I now have to go back to waiting for really any kind of info at all for Digimon Story 6. I may love this franchise with all my heart, but being a Digimon fan can be really kind of painful at points. I digress though. Thank you all for watching, like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and I hope you all have a nice day.